Is Albion Online dying? It's a dramatic question, but I think at this point it's a fair one to ask. For the record, I'm not the first person to make a video like this. I checked on YouTube already and I saw a couple by creators like Big Lips McGee and Mogden already. They mostly covered things that explain why Albion might be going through a declining population, largely stuff that I won't be talking about, so if you are interested, be sure to check those videos out. They're very informative. Now, the thing that actually prompted this video is a Reddit post that I saw recently. The Reddit post simply says, "Is this game losing players?" It made me start to think about the current state of Albion, and I saw quite a few other comments on this post as well. Let me tell you my answer for this post. I said, in terms of total active players, it's hard to say. Steam numbers don't mean anything when most people use a native client, and SPI never releases numbers. It does seem like there are always new players coming into the game, but I can say with a lot of certainty that Albion is currently losing a lot of the older veteran players. Now, there's a lot of discussion in this post about how Steam trends would be indicative of how the current population of Albion is. And so we're going to take a look at the Steam numbers. I've also found a couple other sources that we're going to look at. So let's take a look at those. So if we're taking a look at the Steam charts for Albion Online right now, it's kind of hard to get too much of information from this. If we're looking at the start of the year, so January 2023, it's listing that there is 9,000 players. And then as we get up to March, it says there's 25,000 players. May is about the same. July starts to dip right around 16,000 players. September has 13,000 players. Right about now, we're sitting around 10,000 players. Now, one thing that I did mention is that because I believe most players in Albion do use a native client, I don't think Steam is the best resource for information for the population in Albion Online. But that is one of the pieces of information that we do have to base off any sort of thoughts. Now, the next source that I found that we can talk about is the MMOpopulation.com. They have a page for Albion Online, which apparently they have a comprehensive algorithm that tries to track the population of various MMOs. According to this website, if we're looking at the yearly chart, at the very start of 2023, Albion Online was sitting around 120,000 players. Through the first few months, it was going around 82,000, 80,000. There was a big dip in June, which took it down to 43,000. July had a little bit of a comeback, about 88,000, and then it started to dip again down to about 40,000 players on a daily basis. What that says to me, if we're looking at the numbers from start to end of year, obviously there's patches and stuff that have players coming back, which kind of brings back the population. The large hump that we have here that has players coming back is right around the time that we had the Wild Blood update, which makes a lot of sense. A lot of players are interested in that. We'll come back to the game and check it out. But it does seem to me, at least based on this, that the number of players on a daily basis seems to be going down for Albion Online. Now, with that stuff in mind, I'd mostly like to talk about the participation levels and the various kinds of content that I personally enjoy in Albion. It goes without saying that beyond this point, anything is my personal opinion and experience. If you're finding different in Albion, even the same kind of content that I'm talking about, feel free to leave a comment. Let me know that you're seeing things differently. Let me know if I'm wrong. We're going to start with the content in the worst state at this time, the Crystal League. Not to be confused with Crystal Arenas, the Crystal League is a competitive instance content where teams of 5 or 20 compete against each other and the winners earn a token for the next highest level of competition. I might not explain in detail how each type of content works in this video, but I don't think we can talk about the Crystal League without giving at least a brief explanation of what it is, because I believe a high percentage of Albion players have never participated in the Crystal League, let alone even know it exists. Now, if the current state of any of the types of content I speak about in Albion at this time is due to meta changes, balance patches, rewards, or any combination of different reasons, then this one is different. This one was a direct assassination by SBI. You see, on August 28th of this year, SBI announced the future of the Crystal League Championship and the Crystal League in general. Few changes were made, very impactful ones. Things like season points can no longer be earned from the Crystal League. The Lethal Crystal League will be removed entirely from the game. And that also means that the Crystal League Championship is no longer a part of the game. You see, the Crystal League has had a limited player base since its inception in the Queen update, with some seasons having more teams and some seasons having less. But with the importance of securing season points for guilds, as well as qualifying for the end of season tournament, where the top teams could compete for huge prizes, there's always been a number of extremely competitive, highly skilled players forming teams to compete in the Crystal League. That was until SBI announced an update On August 28th, that would remove the ability to earn season points through the Crystal League, as well as remove the end of season tournament, without increasing any rewards or anything else to make it more imperative for players to continue playing Crystals. So, now this is a typical experience in the Crystal League. This is me signing up for 2 20v20 Crystal matches, followed by 3 5v5 Crystal League matches. I condensed down the 2.5 hours spent doing this, and edited out the part where I'm playing a different game, of course. You'll notice at the end I get to receive all of the minimum rewards in the mail. So it was once my favorite content in the game has simply turned into standing in Conqueror's Hall, hoping for a match before collecting your pity silver bags and tomes. Now I'd say in the past there would generally be about 10 to 15 teams competing to try to get the end of season tournament, as well as dozens of other teams who would mass and play for fun, to get better, for the rewards, to help their guild, etc. Now, where have these players gone? Have they shifted their focus to Hellgates? Have they joined a large ZVZ guild and are instead using this time waging war in the Black Zone? Well, no. Based on players that I know, they're just not logging into Albion anymore. There's absolute gamers. There's no way we don't have a match. No way. I hate this game so much. It's time! It's time! Yo, good job, Power Electronics. Thanks for the carry, bro.
What a game. What a game.
Just had 5 no-shows in a row, boys. How do you feel? Now, if we take a quick look at the last season of the Crystal League, you're going to notice it says there was 10 teams that competed in the whole season. That's between 2 different timers. But if we start looking at the names that are on this list here, you're going to notice a lot of names start to repeat. In reality, basically just these 2 teams actually competed to try to get to the high level of Crystals last season. 2 teams down from what was once a thriving, fun piece of content in Albion. Next, let's talk about Hellgates. In short, Hellgates are a form of instance PvP where teams of 2, 5, and 10 players load into a dungeon and begin killing monsters until another team matches and invades their dungeon, at which point the 2 teams fight to the death. The population of each of these types of Hellgates will often vary on the meta comp or comps available at the time, and because SPI doesn't tend to focus a lot of their balance changes towards Hellgates, these metas can often be stagnant for a prolonged period of time. 2v2 Hellgates have the lowest tier gear required, as well as lowest meta players on a team, so it is generally the Hellgate type with the most active players. 10v10 Hellgates conversely require a fairly expensive set and a large team, so they've had an inconsistent participation since their inception, and 5v5 Hellgates fall somewhere between these two. The Wildblood update brought 2 ridiculously strong things to 2v2 Hellgates: Awakened Weapons and the Hellspawn Staff. These 2 things allowed the top 2v2 Hellgate teams to climb to never-before-seen infamy peaks and create an insurmountable gap between themselves and less experienced teams. I'm not going to get into why the Hellspawn Staff is so overpowered in 2v2 Hellgates, but if you look to the top infamy teams, there's a clear reason why every one of them is using it. Now, with the price point starting around 2 million silver for the staff alone, it creates an unrealistic risk versus reward scenario and a content where the game's rewards are already meager. Though both Awakened Weapons and the Hellspawn Staff have received some nerfs by the time of this video, it does feel as though the population of this content has never recovered. Now, 5v5 Hellgates are probably the content that I've spent the most time in Albion playing. A major Hellgate rework occurred for the Queen update, and from that, 5v5 Hellgates have never had the same level of participation. In fact, I don't know if I've ever done 5v5 Hellgates since that update and not had at least one person in my team or Twitch chat say, "I miss the old gates." The matchmaking system that SPI implemented was intended to create more fair fights in Hellgates, but due to the size of the player base, what is caused instead is often teams will have to PvE through multiple Hellgates before they finally get their opponent, whether it's a fair fight or not. Now, remember when I mentioned how Crystal players didn't move on to other content in the game? Well, 5v5 Hellgates is content most similar to 5v5 Crystals, so they shared a lot of the same player base. It's pretty common for a team to log in an hour early to warm up for some gates or play after Crystals, but with those players no longer logging into the game, the population of 5v5 Hellgates has suffered dramatically. These days, I find if I am able to mass a 5v5 Hellgate team, we will get 1 to 3 fights against the same team before one team will disband and the other will return to PvEing before they give up and disband themselves. Next is 10v10 Hellgates. 10v10 Hellgates have always had a fairly small player pool. The high gear tier and need to mass 10 players, along with high player skill levels participating in stale metas, has often had 10v10 Hellgates described as gatekept. 10v10 Hellgates have such little participation that I can't count how many times drama has been caused because one team started doing 10v10 Hellgates when another team was already using that time to PvE them for fame and silver, and they didn't take the time to let them know they were coming in to fight them. Once again, removing the Crystal players from Albion removed a significant number of players from this content as well. And these days, the most action I see in 10v10 Hellgates is when one Discord server can manage to mass multiple teams so they can simply fight against themselves. Corrupted Dungeons. Corrupted Dungeons are Albion's first stab at supporting 1v1 PvP. Similar to Hellgates, the player will kill monsters until getting invaded by another player, at which point they can choose to fight to the death or escape by breaking crystals. The introduction of the Mists and Beyond the Veil update significantly decreased participations in Corrupted Dungeons by allowing a new form of 1v1 content. Similarly to 2v2 Hellgates, the Wild Blood patch, bringing awakened weapons and shapeshifter weapons to Corrupted Dungeons, again dramatically reduced participation in Corrupted Dungeons. I tend to find these days when I jump into Corrupted Dungeons, I'm getting a lot of repeat fights against the same few people, or fights against very unprepared new players only. The Mists. Mists have a solo or duo version, which allow players to enter a simulated open-world scenario to fight, gather, or earn fame without risking getting jumped by a giant guild Zerg. Personally, I've never been the biggest fan of solo Mists, but when I do enter them lately, it feels to me like I encounter a lot less players. Whereas in the duo Mists, which I actually enjoy a lot, there's often no players at all. A number of reasons that could explain why it feels as though the population of the Mists is going down, but my belief is less veteran players are playing Albion right now. Because lethal content isn't the most new player friendly thing to do, all of these types of content are seeing less people participating. The Roads of Avalon. I've always enjoyed the roads as a way to get a variety of different content. You can get great fame from the chests, you can get great gathering, you can find various random rewards like chests and spiders, all while hoping to find fun PvP action. It has never been strange to have to spend a bit of time finding other players in the road, but it does feel like now when I enter the roads, more times than not, I'm giving up and leaving before even finding other people. ZVZ. Guild Warfare in the Black Zone has changed dramatically since I started playing this game. Various updates, such as the rework of the Black Zone, the introduction of hideouts, energy crystals and power cores, etc., have changed how and why guilds fight in the Black Zone. Though it does seem like the ZVZ population has decreased and there are currently no server-wide wars for guilds to pick a side for, this is actually the content I'm the most hopeful for at the moment. From my perspective, the oversized alliances have lost some of their stranglehold over the game, and instead many of the top guilds are simply looking for content on a daily basis for the enjoyment of their guild members. Crystal Raiders update on January 8th is bringing quite a few interesting changes focused solely on guilds, and with that I think this might actually be a great time to be a ZVZ player. I'm personally shifting my focus away from content that I think isn't as popular and putting more time into playing with the guild, and I think you should as well. So let's hop back to the Albion Reddit once more. I know I talked about it a little bit earlier, but let's actually take a look at some of these posts here. Some of the posts that we're seeing are things like, what is the repair cost based on? People talking about getting their first death. People talking about what to do with items. People looking for brand new builds, stuff like that. Now, just from scrolling through this, most of the content that I'm seeing on here seems to me like very new players to the game, which I think is totally fine. Going to the Reddit is a great place to look for information, but I'm not seeing any of these old players posting stuff on the Reddit anymore. Back in the day, a year or so ago, I would see some sort of variety. There would be new players, there would be old players, there would be people talking about guild content, people talking about lethal content, a nice variety of different stuff. But these days, I'm mostly just seeing new players talking on the Reddit. Now, what does this all say for the state of Albion right now? Well, in my opinion, it seems like a lot of the older players are leaving, but there's still new players coming into Albion. One struggle Albion has always had is getting these new players into some of these lethal forms of content the game has to offer. Most of the most fun stuff in Albion is lethal content. The fact that Albion is a unique and interesting game is literally just based on the fact that it has those things available. A lot of other MMOs out there will offer you a lot of the things that Albion has, but one thing they all lacked is that full loot lethal PvP. And personally, that's the thing that's kept me entrenched with Albion for so long. When I talk to my friends, a lot of them will go and play other games, take a break for Albion, but they do tend to come back after some time. Albion has always had a revolving door where players would be leaving, coming back, etc. But these days, unfortunately, a lot of my friends, when they come back, they leave just as quickly. You guys ever seen The Simpsons? And there's that meme of Abe Simpson when he walks into the house, he puts down his hat, he does a little circle, he picks up his hat and he walks out. That's how it seems a lot of times. Recently, I had a friend that came back to the game after a couple months. I invited him for some crystals. We got no matches. I tried to put together a Hellgate team. I couldn't get people to play Hellgates, and he logged off. And right then I thought I might as well delete this guy from my friends list because he's not logging in again. And I think that's the same experience that a lot of players are having in the game right now. The population of Albion isn't completely dying. There's new players coming in all the time. The ads are still working. The marketing is still working very well for Albion. And unfortunately, I think Albion notices this. I think Albion is putting more of their efforts into getting new players into the game than they are providing a great experience for existing players in the game. Now, with that said, with all the different content that I talked about, all the full loot PvP content, having lower populations, that doesn't necessarily mean there's nothing to do in the game. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't talk about. I didn't talk about PvEing, I didn't talk about gathering, I didn't talk about Avid Dungeons or any of that stuff. And in all honesty, I'm not the person to talk about that stuff. I mostly just do the PvP, and that's what I have an expertise on, so that's really what I want to focus on. But in my opinion, if there's less people in the Black Zone, gathering's probably easier. If there's less people taking dungeons, doing PvE is probably easier anyways. So this really isn't hurting the experience for those players. It really is just hurting the experience for the PvP-based players in the game. In conclusion, Albion is still a great game to play. There's a lot to do and a lot of different enjoyable types of content that you can try. But with that said, it does seem like the best days are behind them for a lot of PvP types in Albion.